Hi, I'm Chase. I'm a product manager for Google News and Google OnePass. Today, I will be describing OnePass, and then Omi, the tech lead for OnePass, will be explaining how to implement the product. What is OnePass? OnePass is an easy-to-use API for authentication and payments. It's a complement to Google Checkout for provisioning access to content for Google accounts, and it's an authentication platform for user rights. Here's an example of a website using OnePass. And the basic scheme is that you can go to a website, we will check if someone has access to a piece of content. User doesn't have access, so they see an option to pay. They then go and pay using checkout. And then afterwards, that Google account has access to the content, and so they see the full version. Give a couple examples of OnePass in the wild. So this is a German website, Tomorrow Focus, which is the example I just showed. But here's my basic scheme where I showed up. I don't have access to content. Note the Google page is in English because my browser settings were in English. So this is all default translated to all the markets that we're in. I'm just going to sign in using my personal account. I have bought this content about 18 times at this point. Wrong password. OK, so we just did a check saying that I didn't have access to the content, and now it's asking me to purchase this for 10 euro cents. So I purchased the content, and now I'm back on the page, and I have access. So if I then refresh this page, came back, it wouldn't prompt me for checkout. I just have access. So here's another example, a US website called Courier News. It's a small publication in Missouri. So this is actually implementing something called metered access. So as you're going to see, I'll be able to get a few articles before I'm prompted to pay. So there's one for free, someone's obituary, 2 for free, 3, and here's a prompt. So this prompt is asking you if you want to sign up. In this case, I do. So this is asking you if you already own a print edition. So I'll just show you the different options. I said yes, and now it's giving me an option to have a discounted price. If I said no, it'll give me those. So here, I'm actually going to buy the print one just so I don't charge myself more, because it's going to my personal account. And here we are. So now I just purchased access, and now I have access to all the content. And I won't ever be hassled again unless I have to log in. OK. So where can OnePass be used? It's a web API for content. So that means it can be used on the phone. It can be used on mobile web. It can be used in app. It can be used for newspapers. It can be used for magazine content. We have one customer who's thinking about doing TV streams. It's really kind of up to you. This is a web API, and it's designed to be flexible. The business models that OnePass supports. So OnePass is designed to be super easy and flexible, handling a wide variety of business cases. It supports subscriptions, as you just saw. It supports pay-per-article, rentals for a period of time, things like free trials, so you can do a month free trial, and then you get access to recurring billing for subscription. Metered access, as you saw. Access for non-digital subscribers. So that was one example that you just saw with Rust, with Courier News, where they actually integrated their print subscribers. There are other ways to do that as well, but we support it pretty readily. And finally, discount coupons. So in case you have a phone version and you want to get a tablet version of a magazine, we offer that kind of functionality. So the cool thing about this is that you actually set up the technology, and then the business model is kind of agnostic to that. So that's all the business model configuration is done using a UI. This is a UI that's coming out, I think, this week. And basically, this allows you to set up things like subscriptions, pay-per-article, you name it, in 30 seconds. You basically say the part of your website or URL structure that you want to block off for content, and then configure business logic, and you're done. And the changes are made instantly. So one of the cool things about this is it allows you to do dynamic pricing per day. So say you could charge something it's $5 the first day, and then the next day go in and change it, and it's $3, you name it. It's designed to be flexible. So OnePass is a payment is designed to enable transactions on third-party websites. What that means is that the publisher is the merchant of record. So we are not a marketplace. We provide the publisher with all of the user data required to complete a transaction for fulfillment, and marketing if the user chooses to continue a relationship with the publisher. So you would want to contrast that with something like Android Market or the Apple Store. This is the publisher hosting content. This is the publisher, and this is not a marketplace. It's just enabling transactions. So what are our requirements? This has to be easy. We have to support all common browsers, desktop, mobile, in-app, minimal upfront configuration and setup, minimal backend requirements, ideally none. There's no database. There's no user repository. Our goal was to have nothing on the backend. We ended up with one server-side call, and that, as Omi will describe, is for security reasons. This is an extremely secure system, and it's surprisingly simple given how secure it is. All or most integration should be on the client. We're talking about drop-in JavaScript and one server-side call. With that, I'm going to introduce Omi, the tech lead on the project, and he'll explain how to implement OnePass.
Thanks, Chase. All right, so I'm going to talk about what it takes to integrate with OnePass, and we're certainly going to look at some code and so on. But before we dive into that, I want to take a high-level look at what the user flows are that you will need to implement in order to integrate with OnePass. And this kind of breaks down the demo that Chase showed you, where you first access a site, you don't have access to the content, you go through the flow of paying for the content, and then finally there's a flow where you have access to the content. And we're going to break that down and see how all of that works. You're going to see a lot of boxes and arrows, but later on you'll see that how a lot of this boils down to just a few lines of code on your part. So don't be intimidated by the number of steps. The power of the system is that we've abstracted a lot of these steps behind a very simple and clean API. All right, so the first flow we're going to start with is the interaction between the user, your site, and OnePass when the user hasn't bought access to the content yet. So it starts with the user accessing the content. The first thing that happens is that your site will redirect the user to a OnePass URL, which is checking to see if the user has access to the content or not. At that point, if the user is not logged in, they're presented with a standard Google login page where they can enter their Google credentials. After they've logged in, at that point, OnePass knows who the user is and what they're trying to access. So now it has all the data it needs to figure stuff out. And what it does is it checks to see if that user has purchased an offer which would give them access to that content. So in this scenario, we're going to say that no purchase was found. What OnePass then does is redirect the user back to the original content that they were looking at. Except this time, we pass an additional URL parameter. You're going to see this in a lot of the code. It's just a simple access check response. The values are yes or no. In this case, the user doesn't have access, so the value is no. And in rendering that page, now the publisher site can see that URL in that URL parameter in the URL, can deduce that, OK, the user doesn't have access to this content. And now the publisher knows what to do. It needs to present the user with a way to buy the content. So some kind of a UI which presents the price, maybe there are different options. You can buy a monthly or a single article purchase. So a UI to present to the user so that they can start the purchase flow. So let's take a look at what the purchase flow looks like. This flow starts where we left off before. The user is now looking at these various offers that they can choose from to buy access to this content. They pick one, And then the publisher website will redirect the user to a OnePass checkout page, passing the ID of the offer that the user chose so that we know, what to charge the user for. OnePass then takes care of a lot of stuff. You'll see that this redirect is a single line of code, and a lot of things happen. If the user hasn't used Google Checkout before, they're put through the sign-up wizard for setting up a checkout account. They can add credit cards. If they're existing checkout users, they can manage their credit cards and so on. It's a very rich UI into Google Checkout. But at the same time, if this is a logged-in user with an existing checkout account, credit card's already in there, like you saw in Chase's example, all you get is this one page with a buy button. And as soon as the user clicks on buy, the transaction is processed. And it's pretty straight. It's a one screen, click on one button, you're done. So once you click on that buy button, complete your transaction, the user gets redirected back to the original article that they were looking at. Again, there's that access check parameter I was talking about earlier. It's added to the URL this time. Response equals yes. But that's not good enough. We add an access token to that URL, which the publisher can use to confirm that the user indeed does have access. And I'll get into that in a little bit detail in a moment. But basically, once the publisher has, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So with this access token and the response parameter in the URL, the user once again tries to access that purchase content, which takes us into the next flow, which is where the user has now paid for the content and is now trying to access it. So this looks very much like the first flow. Users accessing content, they get redirected back to OnePass for an access check. This time, when we check for a purchase, OnePass finds one. The user is redirected back with the response URL parameter and the access token. This is where the publisher calls a simple API on the OnePass side to validate that token. If that token is valid, you can be assured that the user does indeed have access to this protected content, and the publisher can send that content to the browser for the user to look at. So let's talk briefly about this access token. It's kind of the cornerstone of what makes OnePass a secure solution. So what is it? It's a piece of data. It looks like a string, garbled string, numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, all that stuff in the URL. And what it is it encapsulates the user and the offer that they bought in this context. And now, given those two bits of information, once you try and validate that token and pass it back to OnePass, given the user and the offer that they bought and the article that they're trying to access, it's a very quick check to see that the user does have access to that content. And once again, we respond back to the publisher saying, just a yes or no. If it's valid, we send a yes, and the publisher can rest easy that they're not giving access to content that shouldn't be given. The tokens are signed and encrypted. They can't be manufactured. Nobody can make one or make sense of one except a OnePass server. These are bulletproof. So what does it take to integrate with OnePass? Let's get into some of the code. It's just a few simple steps. The first thing you do is you set up offers using that offer UI that we're releasing this week in the Publisher Center. You add access checking code to your content, and then code to respond to whether access is denied, in which case you show offers to the user, and code to respond to if access is granted. You validate that the access is indeed valid, and send that content back to the user. Pretty straightforward. So let's start with a piece of content. Finally, some code. Let's start with a piece of content. It's a very simple HTML file that you may be hosting on your site that now you've decided you want to charge for. You don't want it to be free anymore. So we'll start with this very simple example. I'm going to be using JavaScript and jQuery in these slides just because it's compact and a lot of people are familiar with jQuery. But you'll see that nothing I'm really doing is complicated, or it can be done in your favorite JavaScript library, or really, if you want, do the whole thing on the server side. No magic going on here. Very simple stuff. Everything that's complicated, we've hidden behind our APIs. So let's get started. First thing to do, let's remove the content that you want to now start charging for. And maybe you replace that with a snippet of the original article, or something to convince the user that they really want to buy this. So while we're here, I've also started building this form. This will be where we show the user what offers they can buy. There's a million ways of doing this. I'm just doing a very simple form just for simplicity's sake. You guys, I'm sure, will come up with prettier and cleverer ideas. But for simplicity, I'm going to use just a simple form. The next thing we really need to do is the access check itself. So you'll notice I'm escaping the URL that the user is currently looking at. And you'll see why in a moment. So remember in the flow where the user was accessing content for the first time, and the publisher website at that point doesn't know, does the user have access or not, and does it redirect to OnePass for the access checking. So if the URL doesn't have that response parameter, basically an access check hasn't happened yet. So we look for that parameter in the URL. If it doesn't exist, we redirect the user to the OnePass access check URL. We pass the escaped URL as a parameter in this redirect. That parameter is pretty important for a couple of things. Of course, this is how OnePass knows what to check access for. You're trying to access this URL. Is there an offer you've bought that gives you access to it? That's straightforward. The second reason OnePass needs this URL is that this is where it will send the user back to after the access check is done. OK, so the next thing we add here is handling the case where the response parameter is in the URL, but the user doesn't have access to this content yet. So the show offers method, what it does is present the user with choices as to how they can buy access. So let's take a look at what that show offers method might look like. So here we're basically making an API call to the OnePass pricing API. It returns a list of offers, any of which will give the user access to the content that they're trying to look at. This create offers method gets passed a JSON object, which includes meta information about all the offers that the user could buy. And then that method is up to you. You present that JSON data in whatever way you see fit. Again, you're in control of this UI, so it's very easy for you to make a very seamless experience for the user when they're on your site. But by the time show offers is done executing, we're in the state where the user is looking at offers to choose from. Let's take a closer look at that JSON data that gets passed to the create offers call. Very straightforward. As we've mentioned before, a single URL could match multiple different offers. You can play with different ideas where you want to see if people will buy single article access, will purchase a single article at a time, or will they go for monthly subscriptions? In this case, we've said give the user choices to do either. So in this case, the first chunk of JSON there says, for 50 cents, you get access to the single article forever. And the second one is, for $10, you get a monthly subscription, maybe to the whole site or whatever, the news section, all up to you. Again, this is a very small, minimalist data set. The point is that we don't need to expose all the meta information that defines an offer here. We just need to send to the browser just enough information so that you can build that UI to present offers to the user. It's also entirely possible, by the way, that you just have one URL will have just a single offer. Maybe you only have monthly subscriptions. That's cool. That's fine. It works. And your offers UI that I've been saying is just a buy button or a link, and it could be as simple as that. It doesn't need to be very fancy at all. This whole process is entirely up to you. OK, so I've just shown what the Offers UI might look like based on the JSON that I showed you in the previous slide. In this case, each offer just becomes a radio button for the user to choose from. This is very basic. You guys will make something much prettier, I'm sure. But the key point about this slide is that the user is presented with a buy button. When they click on the buy button, they're sent to that OnePass checkout URL. They're sent there, and that's where the transaction's processed. It's a one-click process if you're an existing checkout user. And then once that transaction is complete, the OnePass backend redirects the user back to this original URL with the response parameter and the token. So this is the last step. Let's see how we handle a request in the case when access should be granted. So response equals yes, and there's a token in there. Oops, let's skip here. OK, so this case when access should be granted, you notice it wasn't in the JavaScript. We just had is there a response parameter? If there is one, does it equal no? The case when access should be granted, when response equals yes, that really needs to be handled on the server side. Any kind of decision-making logic in JavaScript on the client, I mean, you could do this on the client. As you can see, there's nothing special here. Any decision that's made on the client can be instrumented. It takes a few seconds to write a little JavaScript to do whatever your JavaScript was going to do if access was granted. So it's really crucial that that decision not be made on the client for a secure solution. So in my example here, I'm using a Java backend. This is a standard Java servlet. Any Java developers in the house? Great. You'll recognize a lot of this code. It's pretty boilerplate stuff. I'm extracting URL parameters from the request. If the request had a URL parameter of response and it equaled yes, and it had a token which was valid, I send the full article to the client. This is a valid request for protected content. And in this full article, you wouldn't need to send all the access checking logic and the offers UI logic. All that has already happened by now if the user has reached this point. And then the else statement here is if the user didn't have access. And this is when you'd send like the short form of the article, the snippet, or however you all are doing it, and the code to build the offers UI. I need to remember to highlight these chunks of code as I talk about them. OK, so we kind of glossed over that valid token step. Let me show you what that looks like. Java developers, you're going to see that I've copied and pasted 90% of this, just like I'm sure you all have done many times before. This is just what it takes to read the contents of a URL in Java. The only bits that weren't copied and pasted are what's highlighted here. The first highlighted bit is the API to OnePass. That would be, of course, specific to this implementation. And we're passing the token in there. And the next interesting bit is the last line, the return statement, where we see if the token, the API request to validate the token, did that reply with a yes or no? Very straightforward. We don't even want to, no need for XML parsing, JSON. It's a yes or no, so we just send that back. Very straightforward. And that's all the code we need. Just a couple of things to point out. I've shown you a lot of inline JavaScript. Just for brevity, all of that JavaScript could very easily just be put in a JavaScript library of some kind, included in your standard template, header, footer, whatever. And you've now got a very easy way to add access checking to whatever part of your site you want, the whole site if you want it. The second more powerful point I want to make is that nowhere in the code did we say, is this a subscription? Is this a single article purchase? Do we need to do something if tax is included or not? Is there a free trial? There was no code that did any of that. And that's the power of OnePass, actually, is all of that is configuration to us. So if you change the price of something, you price it too high and you realize you need to experiment with a lower price, that's just a configuration change. You want to go from a monthly model to a bi-weekly model, configuration change. Code doesn't change at all. We've taken care of all of that when we do the access checking. So if you change the structure of your website, again, nothing needs to change as far as this implementation code is concerned. So I think that's pretty powerful. So let's just summarize to wrap up here. What do we have to do? You wrote a few dozen lines of JavaScript code on the client, less than that on the server side if you use some JavaScript libraries. You didn't have to have a user management system. You didn't have to set up a database of any kind. No messy integration with cart software and payment processing and merchant and not merchant and credit card verification error codes. We've taken care of all of that for you. And what you get is a lot. Support for multiple payment models. All major browsers and platforms are supported. International currencies, locales, all taken care of for you. And you get the same security and authentication that's behind every single Google account on your site. And I think that's pretty cool. So for more details, please visit www.google.com/onepass. You can sign up there as well. And with that, we are going to open up for Q&A. Just a request, if you have a question, please come up to the mic so that everybody here can hear you and the video recording captures you as well. Hi.
I've got a question about sales taxes. You don't keep track of users, and there's like 8,000 sales tax jurisdictions in the United States alone. When you mentioned locales, do you keep track of where the subscriber is purchasing something so we can give Caesar his due, so to speak?
Right. So again, that's all kind of taken care of for you. The billing address of the user is what determines which tax rate should be applied, and that's Google Checkout functionality. So you don't have to worry about which state is he from, and again, there was no code that did that. All of that has been taken care of for you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure the mic is working, but that previous question was about sales taxes and how are they applied. Yes?
Hi, so I had a question about, I understand you have different offers like monthly plans, subscriptions, and so on. So how do you categorize, like if different parts of my site are kind of parts of different offers, like, am I selling, do I have to like upload my inventory of URLs or content sections? How does that work?
Yeah, I can take that. When you set up an offer, you do have to provide us with some knowledge of the structure of your site. So if you have it's example.com/news/star is sold for a certain amount, then you create an offer and you specify, okay, for this offer, we include the content under /news/star.
Okay.
Maybe another offer has /sports/star. Another offer could have both of them, and so you can play with this, right? $5 for news, $5 for sports, but $8 for both of them together. You can play with all of that.
So I can use like regexes or something that define different areas of my content?
Exactly.
That's right. We allow regexes, and they can get complicated. It doesn't have to only begin with or end with, or
cool.
it can also contain. You can have it's regex.
Awesome.
The power of regex. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question about you said giving access to non-digital customers, and you kind of talked about that. Are you a print subscriber? A lot of the customers that I integrate paywalls for, they have an existing database of users, and they want to actually check to make sure they have a print subscription before they continue on. Do you guys have a use case for that? 'Cause you said there's
Yeah, so basically if you want to do authentication for some existing print subscriber, a newspaper, on that person's website, they would set up a form which says, I think what's the standard these days, your phone number and your address or something like that. So you type in that info and then basically they would do a check to their database. And if the answer was yes, then what they would actually use is one of those discount coupons. So then what they would put a discount coupon in the URL, and they would get a new set of offers, say free or $1 or you name it. But basically, it's a pretty seamless system to the consumer, where if they do fulfillment on the publisher's website, just get access.
It seems to be very URL based. What happens if the URL content changes? Is there anything that helps users, like they purchase something and it's at one location that identifies the content independent of where it's actually published, so that if it moves around the site, they can still get it, or is it all tied to that particular URL where they originally accessed it?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, this was designed for sites to be able to sell their content, and the content is identified by URLs. I do want to note, I want to clarify that we take the entire URL into account. So if you have just really one URL, /article.cgi or whatever, and the way you show different content is by passing different IDs to that one URL, we take the entire URL into account with the parameters as well. Sorry, is that addressing your question?
Well, kind of. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking of is like, let's say I publish something and it's on, I don't know, the front page of my site, and so it has a particular, or it's in a content section, but later, for whatever reason, I decide to move it to the archives. I change my publishing system format, so the URL base changes. I still have old content that's now being surfaced through the new publishing system, but it has a different URL, that kind of thing.
Right. So there are some tricks here. You're right. If content moves from one section of your site to another, and the way you've set up offers is based on those sections, then you're right. Something that somebody had bought in one offer is now in another offer, and there's some confusion there. But the power of this is in how you define what the content is. So again, it comes back to that regular expression question, where if you can build regular expressions to consistently identify which offer applies to what content, then you're fine. And really, that's the only way this can be done, right? I mean, it's hard to track, if you moved an article and there's no way even for you to identify which offer it should qualify for, then the system can't either.
So more concretely, you could have a /news, and you could add that to your offer, and then you could also have /archive/news. And they could both apply. And if /archive/news had nothing at the first point, it didn't really matter, right? No one's going there, that URL doesn't exist. But if you can anticipate the fact that it's going to move from /news to /archive/news, then you can just give the user access to both, and it just kind of gets handled behind the curtains.
Hi there. Saw your offer page. I saw you set up coupons, but I didn't see anything in there about metering, and you had mentioned metering.
Sure.
Could you expand on that?
So metering works on the client. Basically, the way that we are supporting metering is no barrier to entry. And the only real way to do that is to basically not have anyone log in before they start metering, but to use a cookie. So what you would expect is you have a cookie that says user has come once, user has come twice, user has come 3 times, great, show an offer page. And that's all client-side JavaScript. So actually, metering is something that publishers are doing with OnePass, but there's actually no additional setup on our end. It's all client-side JavaScript. Make sense? Cool.
So I've noticed that that we pass the encoded URL and the API calls, and when we're doing the redirects and everything else. Do I have to give you the same URL that the page is actually on, or can I give you one that means something to me?
You don't have to give us the same URL. Just as long as you understand what's going on, that URL is where we're sending the user back to.
Right.
And if that's where you want the user to land up, number one, the other use of the URL was, if that's the URL you want OnePass to use to try and figure out which offer to charge the user for, that's fine. I mean, we're not reading the URL content. It's just used to look up offers and just where to send the user back to.
So it's both the regular expression match and the redirect that you're sending the user back to?
Okay, so the URL that's in the that was passed in URL parameters, the thing we escaped,
Right.
that's not a regular expression URL. That's the actual
No,
URL.
I know, but it's used to match against the regular expressions.
Yeah.
Yes,
That you've
it is.
configured, as well as so you're redirecting the user back. And you're okay if I put in something different there, so long as I understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
your site, and you own the user experience. If that's what makes sense in your context,
Perfect. Thank you.
great.
Got a couple of questions, actually. A lot of the questions have been centered around publishers for magazines or something. Is that a restriction right now, policy restriction, or can it be like a service or log into some?
Content publisher, we use that term very broadly.
Okay.
We're not trying to restrict it to anybody. That was just the best word we could
Okay.
come up with that captures anybody who puts content on the web.
This actually has the other question I had is this actually has a lot of implications as far as non-web-based stuff as well. Like I want to create software, trial software. I guess it was asked previously already, but it's still tied to this concept of a URL.
So
For
yes, it's tied to the concept of a URL.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Hi, I'm from Hong Kong. I'm working for a magazine publishing company, and we are considering making an Android magazine in the coming months.
Yep.
We are exciting about OnePass, but we have a question.
Sure.
When will it come to Asia?
So OnePass is currently available in the US, Canada, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and the UK. We are ideally, by the end of the month, launching or going to be able to support merchants in all checkout merchant countries, which includes Hong Kong, which would be end of May. I don't know. These things tend to slip. So I would say probably realistically June. But that's something we're actively working on.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question. Is the token visible to the consumer, and is that open? Like if they share that URL with the token, what protects that URL from other people taking advantage of the content?
Right. So one of the qualities of the token that I didn't mention in my slides is that it expires very quickly, within minutes actually. So you can't you buy something, send the URL to somebody else, and have them be able to access the content. Think of it as a cached version of the access check that expires,
2 minutes.
in 2 minutes. That's the actual number.
I have two questions. What are the fees for this, first of all?
It's a 10%. Google takes 10%.
Okay, and do you process microtransactions, like even sub-cent?
There's no minimum.
So you even take sub-cent things like?
I do believe it's a cent. I don't really, I would have to check with the checkout
Take 10%
folks.
of a cent? I mean,
Say it again.
do you take 10% of a cent?
So, I mean, for example, that example I gave was 10 euro cents, right?
Okay.
I don't, yeah.
Check out the 30-cent transaction fee.
Yep, so this is 10%, yes. 10%, no minimums. It's the current. So the use of this is up to the policy of the device. Basically, technically, yes, you would have to run it by the policy of each market. How would you do it? With web views? Yeah.
I mean, if you have a browser environment that can support your implementation, then it will work. I mean, there was nothing here that was specific to any environment. Even the JavaScript that we showed you, all of that logic could be on the server side if that's what you want. So it's a pretty flexible system. You can do a lot with it in multiple environments. All right.
Great.
Thanks for coming, guys.